Brad Meltzer, it is a delight to see you. Quarantined, of course, but we're delighted to have you on Class in Session. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
We are, I'm in Coral Gables. I assume you're in Fort Lauderdale or Hollywood. Is that where you still live?
Exactly. Right outside Fort Lauderdale. And I love that we are, of all the people you've spoken to, I think I'm the physically closest and yet as far away as Condi Rice for anyone else.
So, whenever I go, I've written two books, not bestsellers. So no, I'm not trying to connect with you, but I've never seen a backdrop. And it proves that you're a prolific writer, which is where I want to start. What got you interested in writing to begin with? And how can you write so many darn books that are so good?
Well, first of all, I do need to acknowledge that when people want to look smart, they sit in front of books. You sit in front of a bookshelf, and there's nothing that makes you look smarter and more narcissistic than when you sit only in front of the books you've written, right? Every single book. That is what I've been. But obviously, to answer your question, where did I find my love of it? It's my teacher. The same people that so many of you are sitting with today. I had in ninth grade here in Florida, I had Sheila Spicer was my ninth grade English teacher, and she changed my life with three words. She said to me, "You can write." And I was like, "Everyone can write." And she said, "No, you know what you're doing." And she tried to put me in the honors class. I had some sort of conflict. She said, "Here's what I'm going to do. You're going to sit in the corner the entire year. Ignore everything I do on the blackboard. Ignore every homework assignment I give. You're going to do the honors work instead, and you're going to thank me later." And sure enough, a decade later, when my first novel was published, I went back to her classroom. I knocked on the door. She said, "Can I help you?" I said, "My name is Brad Meltzer. I wrote this book, and it's for you." And she started crying. And I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "I was going to retire this year because I didn't think I was having an impact anymore." And I said to her, "You have 30 students. We have one teacher." And that was where I found my love of writing, is that one teacher. So when we're done here, anyone listening, thank your teacher. Thank your teacher. Thank that person that was the first person who ever told you were good at something.
So, Brad, if being a good writer, does that mean you have to be a good reader as well first? Is that what sparks it? Reading someone else's work and seeing how they construct sentences and write in a way that kind of spurs our imagination?
Yeah, I mean that I actually believe that's true. I mean, there's no proven fact, but I think as in any job, if you don't observe it, you're just reinventing the wheel. So you might as well learn from everyone else's mistakes. So for me, I was a huge reader growing up, but I didn't read the great American novel or anything literary. I read comic books. I read Superman and Batman and Neil Gaiman and Watchmen and everything else. And then I read Judy Blume and Agatha Christie, and I just loved, Mark Twain and just those kind of right down the middle. Uh, and for me, I think being a great reader is the very first step to being a good writer every single time.
And who taught you how to read?
It's funny. In my house, my parents were not big readers. They just weren't. But it was my grandmother who had this magical object, more powerful than Harry Potter's wand. It was called the library card. And my family didn't have a lot of money, but we had this library card. I remember going to the library. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and we went to the library, and this librarian there said to me, she took me and said, "This is your section." I literally thought she meant that these books were mine. And she wasn't really wrong, but she was the one who introduced me to Agatha Christie. She was the one who introduced me to Judy Blume, and everything changed my life in that moment.
I'm going to tell you an interesting story about writing. I got my first job because it was at a bank. I didn't go to the credit. I didn't take any business courses at the University of Texas. My first job was with the CEO of the business because I could write a letter. I could write like him. And he needed that. And there was no other of these really smart kids that had finance degrees. None of them could write. They weren't taught it. And I've always thought that was such a huge advantage, because from that, I ended up going to Venezuela with my wife and kids, and my career took off. So I'm a big fan of writing. I wish I could.
No, and that's how it always is. My first job that I ever got, besides scooping ice cream in the Aventura Mall, but my first real job was because I wrote a letter that was just, said, "Listen, I know you're not looking for employees, but take a chance on me." And it was just passionate and vibrant. And this marketing head of this company said, "You know what? I'm going to take a chance on you." And it was just that ability to communicate. So I use it every single day, not just in writing books, but everything I do, I still use that power of persuasion. I know you do too. It will pay you forever.
Yeah, and it's becoming kind of obsolete, don't you think, among the not necessarily you're a little younger than me, but um, in the millennial era, because of technology, being able to craft effective language with the written word is not as it's not as prevalent, and it kind of gives you a little bit of an advantage as a young person. If you're a high school student and you can learn how to write, you're going to be, it's better to compete with fewer people instead of having hordes of people that have the same skills, right? I mean,
I think
it's not
that's
going
right.
away.
Yeah, no. And here's the thing is, yes, we may not be writing letters on hand and licking a stamp and putting it on the back, right? We don't even lick. Well, last time we licked the stamp was 1972. I mean, right there, we stick them on now. But to completely not sound like two old men talking, there is nothing that will ever replace trying to convince one person to see something your way. That will be a skill you will need forever. And it may be on a text, and it may be in an email, it may be in some, when you're watching this and you actually need a real job, and maybe in a hologram form in the future. But you're going to have to eventually use words to explain what you want and convince someone why they should give it to you. And that is always going to be the core of writing. That's what it is. And yeah, maybe you can do it verbally, but you still got to gather your thoughts and persuade and convince. And I think again, if you can use it, it will be the most. In fact, for my own kids, I always say to them, I'm like, listen, I know you love math, I know you're good at math, and I don't mean to say anything bad about math, but writing is what you're going to use every single day. Every single day, you're going to use it.
So we have a couple of questions from students. We normally get really interesting questions. They have the ability to cut right through it, I think. This is from Stella, who's a sixth grader from New York. And she asks, how old were you when you wrote your first story?
Yeah, that's good. Kids always ask two things. They want to know how old I am, and they want to know how much money you make, right? And I love that kids will just ask right out. Like, you'll go into a classroom and they'll go like, how much money you make? And I'm like, okay, next question. But so sorry, I'm making the joke. So how old was I when I started writing, or when the first book was published?
Your first story.
Yeah, so first one, Miss Spicer was the first one who asked for it, but the first one that I ever wrote, I'll tell you this, Stella. My first book that I ever wrote got 24 rejection letters. There were only 20 publishers. I got 24 rejection letters, which means some people were writing me twice to make sure I got the point. And they were like, "Dear Brad, if you didn't get that first letter, here's another one." But I was 24 years old at the time when I got it, with 24 rejection letters. And I said, if they don't like that book, I'm going to write another. And if they don't like that book, I'm going to write another. And the week after I got my 23rd and 24th rejection letter, I started what became my first published work, which was The 10th Justice. And it came out when I was 27. It took me a couple of years to get it out there. So it was 24 when I wrote it, 27 when it came out. But that sounds young or old, depending on how old you are. Stella, it probably sounds old to you, but I will tell you it took 24 rejection letters to get there.
So did you go back after you became more successful and try to get the first book published?
It's funny, that book, I can update it now and probably sell it and, try and make some money, but I never wanted to ever put it out there. In fact, it sits on the shelf above where I'm talking to you. It's up there. My wife had it bound for me. But it's kind of like, you can take an old car and you can put a new radio in it. You can make sure the brakes don't squeak anymore, and you can put a muffler on it so the engine doesn't roar as loud. And you can update it all to where it is today. Put in a good sound system instead of the bad old AM FM radio. But when you do that, you rob it of its soul. And I never wanted to rob that book of its soul. What I love in that book was me figuring out how to write. That's where I learned to write. The only way you will ever learn to write, to anyone out there who wants to be a writer, is you gotta write. That's how you do it. It's like riding a bike. If I said to you, here's how you're gonna ride a bicycle. I want you to get on the bicycle, hold the handlebars. I want you to pedal 3 miles an hour, find your center of gravity. I can tell you all the rules. But until you get on a bicycle and pedal, you will never learn how to ride a bike. And that's how it is about writing. I can tell you all the rules, but until you start writing, until you start typing, until you start telling your story, that's where you're going to learn to ride that bicycle. That's where you're going to learn how to write a story.
So let's dig a little deeper into this, because I think failure is one of the great experiences of life. In my own personal life, when I've screwed up, if I've paused, you can't just keep making the same mistake over and over again. I paused, I reflected on the things I could have done differently, and I got better. I got better, not just in business, but in politics, family, everything. I mean, it's failure. If things go well, you never really get better, because you don't have to. Complacency sets in. But when you fail, you really have to like pause. And so I'm not sure you failed by having that many publishers reject your work, but did it give you more purpose? Did it give you like, darn it, I'm going to make this happen.
Let me tell you how much I love failure, and I mean that when I say it. I celebrate it every day. We all have our own little rituals for when we get our start in the morning. Let me tell you mine. I never get to tell this story, but you asked. So, my 23rd and 24th rejection letter were actually the first 22 I knew were rejections, but 23 and 24 were supposed to be acceptance letters. They had told me, my agent told me, listen, these editors really love the book. These last two, I went to New York. I met with them, and she was like, they're going to buy it. They're going to buy the book. And I was in debt at that point from law school and from college. I had debt to pay off. And so I just had no money. And I said, and my agent said to me, listen, go buy your phone, pre-cell phones. She said, sit by the phone. I'm going to call you at this time. I'm going to tell you what the offers are. So I thought, this is it. So I remember picking up the phone at that time, and I picked up the phone waiting to hear that she was going to tell me how I was going to be out of debt and how the book sold. And I picked up the phone. She said to me, sorry, kiddo. And my heart sank in my chest.
Uh,
And I will tell you this, Governor, every single day that I sit down to write, for 20 plus years now, I replay that exact moment in my head. I literally close my eyes and replay it. I replay what kind of phone I was holding. It was one of those clear see-through ones where you could see the wires running through it because that seemed high tech at the time. I replay the desk that was on my left with the little old swivel lamp from college, the bed with just a box spring and a mattress. There was no headboard or anything fancy on my right. A little terrace that I'm looking over, and a fire station where I count the three doors, 1, 2, 3, and then I say those words to myself, sorry, kiddo. And every day for 20 years, I say it over and over because I never, ever want to not appreciate the job I have today. I never, ever want to not be thankful for what I'm able to do today. I always want to be as hungry as I was when I was 24 years old and couldn't do this at all. And for 20 plus years now, every single day I sit down to write, I say it, sorry, kiddo, sorry, kiddo, sorry, kiddo. That's the secret. To me, you take that failure and learn from it, and you turn it into rocket fuel.
so that's fantastic. I'm gonna I'm gonna figure out a way to get that out to everybody because I do think that's what's missing a lot for young people: the resiliency, the grit, the tension of wanting to succeed and be provide for your family, be successful. All those things are good things, and you're motivated. When you have your failure, you're motivated to improve, and that's if we all improve, we'll all be better. So Lincoln, you're a huge Lincoln guy.
Of course.
Um, he's probably the king of failure, isn't he?
He is, he true. I mean, the presidents
Independent.
that we love most are Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. And they are over and over. We love to tell the stories that they're the perfect men, right? They're on the $1 bill and the $5 bill. They've done everything terrific. We tell the story about George Washington that, he brought us democracy and we held hands. We defeated the British, the greatest fighting force of all time. We tell the story that Abraham Lincoln is the greatest president, freed the slaves in the Emancipation Proclamation, won the Civil War. Those are great stories. They're wonderful stories, but they're not the entirety of the story. And to me, if it's easy for Abraham Lincoln, why do we care? What's far more interesting to me is that Abraham Lincoln is so hated when he's running for president and has lost. I think he loses 8 elections before he finally wins. I think it's 8. And when he finally wins, what's so incredible is he's so hated, they won't even put him on the ballot in 10 of the southern states because they hate him so much. They're writing death threats against him every single day. They're saying it's horrible. But 3 days, they give him 3 days when he's elected president before South Carolina says that they intend to secede from the Union. That's how long they give him. That's how much hatred they have for him. And to me, what I love in that moment is we all know Abraham Lincoln at the end of his story. But what's far more interesting to me is when he's at the beginning of that tale. You know what Abraham Lincoln is doing when they tell him that he's won the nomination for the presidency? He's basically on the back of the building in an alleyway playing handball. He's just a regular guy. Before he wins the presidency, and he has to, I'm sorry, before he's sworn in for the presidency, you know what he does? One of the last things he does, he says, I want to go see my family. He wants to see his father's grave. He wants to say goodbye to his stepmother, who's one of the people who he just loved and is still alive. He goes to see his stepmom. And when she says goodbye to him, she starts crying because she's fearful that, you know what, this is going to be the last time I see him. I'm worried, she says, that he's going to be assassinated. And she's absolutely right. And what I love is that in those moments, one of the things we do today with our heroes, and it's a mistake, is we take our heroes and we build these great statues of them and we worship at their feet. But you have to remember that Abraham Lincoln, at the beginning of the Civil War, when he first takes office, is worried about failure, worried how he's going to hold the country together. 3 days in, and they're already the country split apart, all on his watch. It's an utter disaster. His first inauguration speech isn't so great. People think it's soft. They think it has no impact. He's totally flailing and he's trying to figure out what to do. And what I love is that means anyone you look up to, whether it's Abraham Lincoln or Rosa Parks or George Washington, we have to remember they all had moments where they were scared and they were terrified. And they didn't stop. They still chose to go forward. That's what we have to remember. And we have to remember our heroes are just like us.
He also was an amazing writer. He wrote his own speeches, and those were the most eloquent speeches of his time. Another kudo for good writing.
Yeah, and you know what he said, and just to focus on it just for a moment, because I think it's so important today. You know what he says in that first inauguration? So he's hated by everyone. Everyone's split apart. The country's split in two. And you know what he says? He says, we shouldn't be enemies. We should be friends. That's what he says in his first inauguration speech. Again, think about it right now where we are in the country. We shouldn't be enemies. We should be friends, that we should defer to the better angels of our nature. That's as important today as it was in 1861. We still need that message.
I hope the students that are watching this conversation go read the second inaugural of Lincoln.
That's the magic one.
Lights out, home run.
Oh yeah.
They didn't have baseball back then, but that was pretty amazing. So you're back to your right. You have books that my grandchildren read.
The kids' books, yes.
So what motivated you to? You have range of books from fiction, nonfiction, for adults, for children. What got you interested in? Partially, I think you've already answered the last question. Children learning about people who they should look up to. What got you excited?
And what it did was, and I appreciate you asking because it is important to discuss. You know what it was? I had kids. I had a new audience that I didn't have before, and I was tired of my own kids looking at reality TV show stars and people who are famous for being famous and loudmouth athletes, and thinking that's a hero. I tell my kids all the time that's being famous, and being famous is very different than being a hero. And I wanted my kids to learn those lessons of perseverance and of kindness, right? I mean, this one that I happened to pull off, like this is Neil Armstrong, right? Neil Armstrong never used to use the word I. He used to use the word we. We did this. We accomplished it. And he wasn't just talking about his fellow astronauts. He was the first man on the moon, but he wasn't just talking about his fellow astronauts. He was talking about the scientists, the mathematicians like Katherine Johnson, the tailors who were sewing together his spacesuit. We did this. We accomplished it. Remember when humility was a great American value? We've lost that, and we need it back again. And so to me, I wrote these kids' books because it's what I want my own kids to have: lessons of generosity, lessons of perseverance, as you said, lessons of grit, and teaching them that every hero like them, every hero that we look up to was just like them. In fact, one of the stories we tell in Neil Armstrong is he used to love, and this is good for every student out there, his favorite thing when he was little, when he was your age as a student, was climbing trees. He used to love climbing trees. And he had this big tree in his backyard he used to climb. And one day he grabbed a dead branch. The branch cracks and he falls 5 feet from the tree, lands on his back, wind knocked out of him, can't breathe. His sister goes, gets his mom. Mom comes running. And you know what the most important thing, though, that he does in that moment? He gets back up again. And he climbs again. Then he obviously becomes a test pilot. He gets his pilot's license before he even gets his driver's license. That's how much he loves flying. He flies, little planes and then big planes and then military planes, and eventually gets to, of course, be the astronaut that goes and is the first man to walk on the moon. But what he says in that moment is, one great step, one giant leap for mankind. You don't get to take that giant leap until you take all those thousands upon thousands of smaller steps before it. That's how you get there. No great thing in the world is ever done just by going like that. It takes hard work. It takes perseverance. It takes falling out of that tree and getting back up again. And that's the lesson we all can use.
My favorite expression is Ben Franklin's expression of little oaks fell great. little strokes fell great oaks. It's
Yeah,
little
Ben,
things.
you're so smart because Ben Franklin's in our next hero book. So I've been
Is
in Ben
he?
Franklin. Oh, he's the next one coming in October. So
Yes, outstanding.
he is the guy can write, man. He can write.
I don't know how. I mean, the our founders. I mean, Ben Franklin did 20 things
Well,
well.
that's what the whole book is about, right? Is not we think of him, oh, he, lightning, and you're like, oh, he's an inventor, oh, he gave us the first free library, oh, he gave us fire stations, oh, the guy invented the like parts of a rocking chair that would power something when you rock. I mean, he is over and over good at everything. He's like the Leonardo da Vinci of our time. But the thing that I pulled away from him is that, and we use this in the book, is that a good idea is like lightning. It'll hit from, you never know where it's going to hit from. When it does, it can change the world. So whatever your crazy ideas, whatever you love, whatever student, some of you love ballet and some of you love dance and some of you love video games and some of you love sports, whatever it is you love, go to that passion. That is how you will change the world. Do what you love. Find someone to pay you to do it. It is the secret to a good job. It is a secret to change the world. And you see it over and over, right? I mean, Neil Armstrong loved to fly. Jane Goodall loved chimpanzees and animals and used it to change the world. And just whoever it might be, they always over and over are using their passion for something. So find that passion, keep pushing with it.
So the last question is from Parker, who's a 10th grader from Florida. And he asks, who are your favorite authors and what are you reading right now?
Oh, yeah. My favorite author is this guy, Brad Meltzer. Sometimes I read his books and I just go, oh, I watch myself on television. I go, oh, Meltzer, you've done it again. No, so Parker, my favorite authors, I'll tell you, it's weird being an author. It really is, because everyone always wants to know who you're reading. And I just tend to, I love Neil Gaiman. I love Alan Moore. I love comic book writers like that. But I also love everyone from Dr. Seuss, who had an impact on me, to, as I said, Judy Blume. But I'll tell you my favorite moment, maybe, and this is probably a good place to close for us. I'll tell you one of my favorite moments of being an author because it involves one of my favorite readers. So I'll reverse the question on you, and I'll tell it to you because it's a personal story. But a little over a year ago, I wrote this book, this one, about the secret plot to kill George Washington, and I loved reading the book. And before Governor, your father passed away, and I know you knew this, but they were inviting some of his favorite authors to come read to him. And favorite authors, I was like, well, who are you going to get? And they said, we'd like you to come. And I was in Kennebunkport doing a literacy event with your mom, and I went to read the book. And I brought the book to him, and he was kind enough to give me a blurb. Him and President Clinton both gave us blurbs on the book. And I walked into the room, and it was myself and my wife. And we knew this kind of was the end. The Secret Service had said to us, this is going to be the end. They said, listen, he's going to fall asleep in about 5 minutes. He's just sleeping a lot these days. So you'll read to him for 5, 10 minutes. You'll get out of there. He'll fall asleep. It'll be great. I said, it's great. I'd love to do it. And we go in there. And again, we know what's happening. It's myself, my wife, President George H.W. Bush is there, and his service dog, Sully. And I see a stack of books up on his desk with his favorite authors there. And I see a copy of The First Conspiracy there. And I brought my own copy, and his was dog-eared. And I said, sir, you want to read this copy? He says, mm-hmm, because at that point he couldn't speak anymore. He's like, mm-hmm, or uh-uh. And I brought the scene to read to him, one of my favorite scenes, again, from my favorite author. It was a scene where George Washington has the Declaration of Independence presented to his troops for the first time, has it read to them. And sure enough, 5 minutes into the chapter, President Bush falls asleep. And I think, I just want to finish the chapter and I'll sneak out of here. But I get to those words we all know. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And in that moment, President Bush's eyes pop open and he's locked on me. And it's like the words of the Declaration of Independence are his very lifeblood. It's like an infusion. And I get to the end of the chapter and I say, sir, you want to read another chapter? He's wide awake. Mm-hmm. Get to the end of that one. You want to read another, sir? Mm-hmm. And another? Mm-hmm. And instead of being there for 5 or 10 minutes, I'm there for a full hour. And when the hour is done, I say goodbye to him. I know I'm never going to see him again. I thank him for the blessings he's given me in my life and my career and to my family and the kindness he's shown all of us. And I remember at the funeral, the one word that was used over and over was this one word. Can be applied to him, but can also be applied to you. But it was this word over and over, decency, to describe him. They used the word decency. And yes, it's because he was such a decent man. But I think as a culture, we're all starving for decency right now. We are all starving for decency. So any kid out there, right? There's so many things that make us mad in the world today, but be better than what angers you. Find the decency, and that's how you get to be the true leader. I know it doesn't seem like it right now all the time, but I promise you it will work. And that lesson came from, again, I turned it around, but from one of my favorite writers, a guy named Thomas Jefferson, rewritten by Ben Franklin. Even he wasn't good enough to write the first draft himself. It took that to write the Declaration of Independence. So that was kind of two of my favorite writers. They wrote a pretty good. It wasn't a book, but it's pretty good.
I
The
got it.
Declaration was a pretty good one.
In fact, I think we all ought to reread it and to aspire to the aspiration of the Declaration, particularly now with racial strife and with the challenges we face. We can get through this if we adhere to the beauty of the Declaration, for sure.
Listen, one of my Abraham Lincoln favorite things that I think he over and over did, I think it's what all great presidents do, is that in times of trouble, you can reach for anger, you can reach for all the things that make us mad, but the best ones in moments of crisis, especially now, especially with the race issues that are going on, we must reach for the light. We must reach for the good in us, not for what divides us, but what unites us. And I think when we do that, that's where I think the United States prove we're the United States of America. That's when we're our most powerful, our most successful, always better at every level.
Thank you, Brad. You're a good man.
You too, sir. Thank you for having me. Thank you to every student listening. Again, please thank your teacher when you're done. Even if it's not this year, find a teacher, find someone who took a chance on you, find them, track them down, and say thank you. And thank you to the teachers out there. It means more than you know.